right, well, good evening. Welcome to Travel Photography, Creating Compelling and Meaningful Images with Colby Brokvist, moderated by Gordon Wenzel. I'm Susan Kreischer, Associate Director of Alumni Relations. Before I turn things over to Colby and Gordon, I want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and I want to welcome several SU faculty and staff who are attending tonight's event, including President Jonathan Green and First Lady Miss Lynn Buck, Melissa Kimura, Vice President for Advancement. Also from the advancement team are Chris Markle, Michelle Sears, Jody Swartz, Becky Toth, and Logan Sweet. If you have questions tonight, please use the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Our moderator, Gordon Wenzel, Adjunct Faculty of Photography, joined Susquehanna in 2012. Bringing with him decades of experience as the owner of a professional photography business and as a professional commercial photographer. He has had the privilege of photographing 3 US presidents, dozens of celebrities, and scores of CEOs. His work has appeared in the books Photos That Inspire and Professional Photographers of American Loan Collection, as well as numerous annual reports, print campaigns, and magazines such as Sports Illustrated and American Photographer. He regularly exhibits his personal art photography in fine art galleries. The son of a photojournalist and grandson of the manager of a commercial photography lab, photography has always been part of Gordon's life. Gordon?
Thank you, Susan. Colby graduated from Susquehanna in 1999 with a degree in geology and environmental science. He was a member of Sigma Phi Epsilon and the Student Government Association. He served as class president the freshman year and class senator his sophomore, junior, and senior years. When he graduated from Susquehanna, he took a job working for a consulting firm, but quickly realized he didn't want to work in an office. So he quit his job and headed for the mountains, specifically the Appalachian Mountains, where he learned what he wanted to do, help people make a connection with nature, and he's been guiding ever since. He's an expedition leader of Natural Habitat Adventures and Southern Yosemite Mountain Guides, and owner of Colby Outdoor Photography. Colby has a special affinity for mountain and polar realms and has guided trips to destinations as diverse as Churchill, Yosemite, Antarctica, Patagonia, Yellowstone, Namibia, and the Everglades. He has been featured on National Geographic Weekend Radio and has worked on and off camera for various travel-related television productions. He's also published travel nature photographer. He's also a published travel nature photographer and occasional essayist. Colby lives just minutes outside Yosemite National Park, where he enjoys hiking, mountain biking, rock and ice climbing, birding, and photography in his free time. He's backpacked some of the US's most famous long-distance wilderness routes, including the Appalachian Trail and the John Muir Trails. Most recently, he wrote a book entitled The Professional Guide's Handbook, How to Lead Adventure Trips and Expeditions. And he was featured in the documentary film The Guide by Off the Map Media and the World Wildlife Fund. When I first met him as a guest speaker for Breakthrough in 2021, since then, I've really enjoyed following his adventure photography on Instagram. Most recently, his trips to Antarctica and East Africa. Colby, welcome.
There we go. Thanks, Gordon. I appreciate it. It's a lengthy introduction, but it's good to be here once again. This time, I guess, not just with you and your students, but with anyone from SU that would like to join.
Welcome back.
I think we lost Colby, so if you'll just give us a minute, hopefully he will reconnect in just one moment.
while we're waiting, if you want to check out his work on Instagram, it's Colby Outdoors.
Hi there.
Welcome back.
I'm not sure what happened there, Gordon. I apologize to everybody, but I appear to be back here. Let me start up our show again. If somebody could just give me access to the screen sharing once more, I think we'll be ready to go.
You're now co-host.
Okay, there we go. Are we back? Can you see the screen once more?
We see you. We don't see your PowerPoint.
We don't see the PowerPoint. Okay, we can fix that. How's that?
There we go.
Okay, thanks. Thank you both, and thank you everybody watching for your patience. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we were just about to get started. I guess good news is nothing's been interrupted yet, eh, Gordon?
Yep, you're good to go.
Okay, well, shall we jump in? I can start, and you know, I know folks might have questions about things as we're going along, and feel free to interrupt me. And if there are questions appropriate to, you know, what the topic is at the moment, that's great. And otherwise, I'm happy to spend some time after the presentation here, which will be about 30 minutes, and we can get to any additional questions that people might have as well. So thanks. So yeah, today we're talking about creating compelling and meaningful images, and you know, in you know, context of all the different varieties of the different flavors of photography, we're talking specifically today about adventure travel photography, and so compelling and meaningful images that you might take when you're out on a trip on your own. You know, you go out and you're on vacation and you love photography. It's a hobby. You want to create, you know, some wonderful images, but you also want to have a good time on your vacation. You want to be hopefully present in the moment to learn about the place, understand it, have some time to relax and enjoy your holiday. Because I find that we can, as photographers, sometimes get so excited about the places that we're going and the things that we're doing, that sometimes we forget to put the camera down. And so I'm here to make an argument, a case today, that, you know, by putting the camera down and paying a little more attention to what is going on around you, not only can you create more compelling and meaningful images, but you can also relax and enjoy your vacation a little bit more, and appreciate being in these places that you're traveling to. So that's what we're here to talk about. I'd like to offer up a case study. So as Gordon mentioned, I'm fortunate to have just returned from East Africa. And so here's an image, right? This is a picture. I would call this a snapshot. This is pulled from an iPhone, and it's when we first arrived to the Serengeti, in this little camp we were in. It actually sits in this river bottom, as most of the camps do, because they're out of the way of most of the migrating animals, and you can find some shade there, and it's a nice place for the camps. And then so from the camp, you leave the riverbed, and then you come up and you're on these classic plains of the Serengeti. And when we got up to the top, this is what we saw. And it was really exciting. You know, we're there, you're hoping to see all the wildlife, you hear to see the wildebeest and these great African expanses. And that's exactly what we got. And so here's a little snapshot of the first sort of part of the migration that I was able to witness. And it's fine, right? I actually took this picture for purposes of storytelling, to illustrate that it's not a great picture, right? This is the phenomenon with adventure travel. And what I find is that when we get into these new places, we're very inspired, we're very excited, and it's hard to slow ourselves down. But really, by virtue of travel, there's a lot of new things to learn and experience. And the art of photography is storytelling through images. But if we're just snapping away at whatever's happening in the moment from wherever we happen to be standing or what's going on in that moment, we might be missing the bigger picture of what's happening around. And so here I was, we're sitting in the safari vehicle and we're watching these wildebeest go by. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is amazing. What is happening here? Well, here we have what we estimated to be a couple 100,000 wildebeest that were moving through this one region. And we could see for miles and miles and miles in front of us and behind us with binoculars, this line that we're looking at, it's just one line of all these wildebeest moving through. And so there's so many of them and they're in each other's way and they can't figure out where to go. And then you kind of realize that there's no real leader in these, they're all just kind of like big herd animals moving around. But they're always moving. And that was one of the things that surprised me. Like they don't just spread out on the plains very often and feed. They're always on the move because they're looking out for predators. So anyway, the point of this story is that there was a story there. And that if a person is inclined to just pick up the camera and just be taking pictures of whatever is happening in front of them, and not taking the time to stop and think about what's happening, then you're missing the story and you're missing the experience. And so in this case, some time to just sit with this one evening. I actually didn't take any other pictures other than this. I didn't pick up my, pro grade camera at all this night. I just took it all in and was there for the first time. And what struck me is that there are tons of animals. They're always in each other's way, and that they're always on the move. And those are the things that really struck me about this. So then over the next day and a half, then working with the safari guide and the other photographers there, we set out to try to capture the images that told that story about these wildebeest. And so we ended up with these pictures. And so here we are now, we're in more of a classic landscape. You know what these animals are because you're looking at their faces, not their butts. There's some zebras and some acacia trees, a more classic landscape to tell you what's going on. And there's a little bit of movement going on. There's a lot of dust, there's birds flying. So there's a lot more happening here that helps to tell the story of just how many wildebeest were around. So that was one of the images that I was hoping to try to capture. The other part of the story was then movement. And so at a different time, we were able to find these wildebeest moving at, they were taking turns basically like sort of running, jogging, while some were walking, and then some other ones would stop walking and other ones would run. And so we had the ability to set ourselves up so where there was some nice light in the evening and we can take pictures of all these things moving by. And to me, these images really tell the story of the wildebeest and what it means to be on the Serengeti for the great migrations. And so what we're really teasing into here is the idea of situational awareness. And that's one of the big messages that I hope that you'll take today, is that if we're not experiencing the places and the things that we're encountering during our adventure travel trips, then it's going to be difficult to have an image or a collection of images that tells the story of that place, because we don't know what the story of that place is if we're not stopping to pay attention to what's happening around us, and figuring out what stories there are to tell, and then choosing how to tell those stories. And then the other thing about deciding then using situational awareness is you have more time to not be taking pictures, which might sound counterintuitive, but when we're on our adventure travel trips, a big part of it is your experience, right? And so the images that you're making should not only tell the story to other people of what's happening there, but I would think that you would want them to be meaningful to you, and they can represent the story of you being there. And so taking time to actually be present in that place is really important. And then when you look at your images later, you'll have a smaller selection of images that then remind you of what it felt like for you to be there, and what you took away from that experience. So when we think about situational awareness, we're thinking about a couple different things. One is just noticing what's happening around you and paying attention. The second is then thinking about the implications of that, whatever that might be. And then thirdly, then predicting a future outcome, right? And if I go back to the wildebeest image, it's a great example of that. Is like we noticed these guys are always on the move, right? And then what's interesting about that, that thing that you noticed, it's like, well, that's unique. Not a lot of animals are just always on the move all over the place. And so capturing them then on the move would capture the essence of this animal out on the Serengeti. So then thinking off into the future, then you can make a plan for figuring out how to capture that special thing that you noticed. And that's the power of situational awareness. Now it can manifest in different ways as well. If we think about the art of photography and coming up with compelling images, we can play this game in a different way as well with situational awareness. So the picture on the left, both of these pictures actually are from the Mariposa Grove of giant sequoias in Yosemite National Park. Now the picture on the left, if you notice, that has big white corners in the top left. It's very, very distracting, and also sort of in the middle of the image, there's some big bright white spots, and I don't really like that. So if you were to arrive at this place, you would go and there would be a sign that would say, this is the Bachelor in 3 Graces. And if you took a picture at that sign, which is what most people do when they show up, you'll get the image on the left. If you take a few steps off to the right, then what you can do is you can block off all of those big bright white spots that are in the top, and you can create an image that then keeps your eye focused down into the trees in the middle, as if you're going to go for a walk through the forest. And so that image would be marginally better if you're thinking about composition and just how someone's eye would travel through the image. But what's really missing here? If I didn't tell you that these were giant sequoias, you probably wouldn't know. Maybe you wouldn't know that they were giant sequoias. You might not have a sense of scale for these trees. And so just how big is a sequoia? What is it like to be in these places? What is it like to actually go through the forest? And so what I find when I'm in the forests, these gigantic forests, is that you need something for scale. And so again, thinking about being a traveler, visiting Yosemite National Park and in adventure travel, say, what can we do to show off the scale of this? And so again, stopping to think about the situation and what you're seeing in the story that you'd like to tell. How big are these things? What can I do to make them seem big? And what was it like for me to be here? Well, you can include a person. And so now we've recomposed everything. We've put a person in this image, and now you get a sense for just how big the giant sequoias really are. They're indeed giant. And so situational awareness can apply to realizing what's happening in the environment around you, but also paying attention to your actual work as you're creating it, and determining, judging if your imagery is actually compelling and if it is indeed telling the story that you want it to tell, or is it merely just documentary? Because we are in these places and we get really excited about the things that are going on, and so clearly that excitement is going to show up in your image, right? Actually, that's not the case. We need to give a little bit more thought to it. So situational awareness becomes really important. I have one more story about situational awareness, just to think about it again in a different way. So this is an image of an orca, and if you look in the top right, you'll see that it's actually chasing a Gen 2 penguin. This is down in Antarctica, and in this case, I'm on an expedition cruise vessel. And it was an amazing moment when we saw this small pod of orca coming, and they were hunting this penguin. And it turned into, not many moments after I made this image, it turned into them actually teaching a young one how to hunt the penguin. And it was really amazing. But what was happening was the penguin was using the ship for protection, and it was going under, and it was jumping on the back deck, and then it would go up to the front, and the whales were all chasing it around, and it was really exciting. But what we had was people running from one deck up to the next deck, and then they're going from the stern over to the bow, and then they're going back over to the starboard side, and then they're going back to the bow. And it was complete chaos, and everyone was running around, and in some way it was really fun, and it was really exciting. And if you could follow the whales around, you could see all of the action. But I was there as a photography guide, part of a team of 3. And what we realized was, well, if you're running around trying to take pictures of these guys, you're always a step behind. You're taking pictures of them behind. You can't compose anything. You can't decide what's going to be in the water. One side of the boat had these terrible reflections from the sunlight that was coming down. And so there were only a certain number of places that were good for photography. And if you wanted to get a compelling image, rather than just have the excitement of following the whales around, and either was a good choice. But if you chose that you wanted to try to get some images of this, you had to stand still. And so myself and the other photography guys, we got on the radio and said, hey, let's get all the photographers over to the back side of the boat, over on this side of the boat. We'll get together. We're going to anticipate the action, and we're going to try to make some more interesting images. And we set people up with polarizers. We talked about the virtues of a wide angle versus a telephoto lens in this case. We had everybody set up for fast shutter speed and fast action, and then we waited. And some of the people were going mental, right? Because you could see, oh, there's this action over here, and people were running over there, and it's what's going on? What's going on? It was like patience. If you want to get something that's good, then you need to just be patient. You need to maintain that situational awareness of what's happening and know that you're setting yourselves up for something special. And then what happened was eventually, as they had been doing, they dove under the boat. They came over to our side. We had no reflection. Everybody was set up for some great shots, and people made images. This is the images that I made in that area. And so stopping, putting the camera down, paying attention to what was happening, figuring out the patterns of predator versus prey, and then setting ourselves up for success from a technical standpoint, ended up in people getting some really compelling images. So a few different ways you could think about situational awareness when it comes to your adventure photography. How we doing, Gordon? Do we have questions before I switch to the next idea?
No, but I have a question. So when we're thinking about this, so in my classes, there's an emphasis, I place an emphasis on learning to see, which is the opposite, because when we're around familiar places, we tend to have blinders and not really notice anything. And yet when we're in a new place, just like you say, everything's new. And so you just want to like take pictures of everything, right? And what you're talking about is being more thoughtful. And so that you don't create just a generic snapshot kind of idea. So one question that I have is, of course, how do you've kind of mentioned how you do that, being present in the moment, being patient, predicting the outcome. But is there a fear or worry that you're going to miss the decisive moment?
Yeah, 100%, right? That's the huge fear, and that's why people don't put their cameras down. My answer to this, I've been asked this a lot. My answer to this is yes. You will occasionally miss that one moment because you pause to pay attention to what's going on. But most of the time, that one, there's more than one moment, right? There's more than one moment. And so if you just stop and you pay attention a little bit, in most cases, it's going to pay off in the long run, and you're going to end up with more images that are more compelling. Every once in a while, you're going to miss out on an opportunity. Yeah, I think you probably are. I've missed out on an opportunity. I've missed out on opportunities because I decided to switch lenses, partway through something. Like, I'm happy with what's going on. This is cool. It might get better. I want to switch lenses. And just as I take the lens off the body, that's when that thing I was anticipating happens, and then I don't get anything. It's going to happen. The reality is that things are happening in nature all of the time, and we do our best to be there and to be present as photographers, but you can't be there for everything all the time. And my feeling is, if I was there to witness those things, that's just as special as making an image and having that, because I can still remember that up here. But I think the probability is in favor. Do you subscribe to that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, that's great. It's true. You may miss that one moment, but you may come back with a more compelling picture because you're telling more of a story, because you're more thoughtful and thinking about it.
Yeah, and especially with wildlife, like so far, I have other images other than wildlife. So far, we've sort of harped on wildlife, but it's easy to miss wildlife shots, right? With other types of photography, I think you could argue that you have more time to stop and think. Wildlife is fleeting, and you just never know when they're going to do what they're going to do. And I mean, how many times have I been there with people and you just get tired of holding your camera up and you just put your camera down for the rest, and that's when the thing happens. And we just have to be comfortable that that's all part of the game out there sometimes, I think.
Yeah, very dynamic situations, right?
Yeah, exactly. Do the best that you can. Photojournalism, in the trenches. Okay, well then, yeah, let's jump on the next topic here. So we're thinking about anticipation and creating moments. So part of situational awareness is then predicting future outcomes, right? So noticing what's going on, figuring out what that means and what you're going to do with it, and then predicting the future. So there's a few different ways you can predict the future. One of them would be anticipation of something that's going to happen. And then the second would be creating something that you know is possible now in the circumstances you find yourself in. So let's talk about that a little bit. So this was a trip that I took out to the desert where we were doing a big 5-day mountain bike trip along the White Rim. And we're in Canyonlands National Park this time. So we were biking along a road that you see along the left-hand side, but there are all these really fun things to do, as you see with this little slot canyon that we encountered on the right. And so I was very much participating in all the action, right? I'm mountain biking, I'm going on canyoneering, I'm with everybody. And as a photographer, I don't want to have to be just thinking about photographs all the time. But what I can be thinking about, or how about this? I want to be thinking about photographs, but I don't want to actually be holding the camera and actively shooting all of the time, because I want to be engaged in what's going on. And sometimes it just wasn't practical to be trying to take pictures while I'm on my mountain bike on the gravel. Doesn't make sense either. So then in this case, we're thinking about, all right, what's going to happen then in the future, and how can we be ready for that? So as an example, a couple examples then on the left, I happened to be near the front of our group mountain biking, came up over the hill, and like this magical scene was there that really encapsulated to me what this trip was all about. Because there weren't that many places where, you know, leading lines, like things like roads and sort of graphic elements of the landscape, lined up to where like people shots and landscape lined up. And so this is, you know, probably halfway into the trip, and finally came up over this little hill and recognized like, here we go. Like, here's something that's that's more interesting, where I can put all of these elements together. Because one of the aspects of storytelling is you want to add vocabulary to your story. So the more interesting things you can put in your image, the more compelling that image and the story that image is telling will be. So in this case, we have the road, the nice leading line. We have these big, you know, mesas and pillars, and we put a mountain biker in there. And so what I did to create this moment, really, it was just recognizing it as situationally aware, knowing that I was after something to this effect, and then waiting for the people behind me to catch up, and then sending them along, and was able to make the image. And it added a lot to my experience, and it didn't really take away from the rest of my day mountain biking and enjoying actually being there. And to me, this really, you know, captures what the feeling was like for us out there. And then on the right, it's something similar. And in this case, I was hiking behind the woman that you see here, and there were some really interesting like curves and movements and everything in these slot canyons, but you know, I didn't want to stop everybody and turn it into a photo shoot and be like, oh, this is cool, like come back, let me set my camera up, and then you can walk through this whole thing again, right? I didn't want to do that to the people that I was with. It wasn't they weren't models, it wasn't a photo shoot, it was just a vacation everybody was on. So instead, I just pulled out my camera, I had the wide angle lens on there, I set it up for a really fast shutter speed, and then I used the screen. And I was just turned the LCD screen up, and I was just walking and kind of looking down in the LCD screen and looking ahead of me and thinking, okay, cool. Here's a place where, you know, there's a nice turn, again, some nice graphic leading lines. We had some sunlight in there for some color, and then so to not sort of acknowledge to anybody what I was up to, I just had the camera on my neck, and I used the viewfinder down, and I just continued to walk behind my friend with a really fast shutter speed, and I was composing it and firing off some images as we went. I think I took 5 or 10 of these, you know, as we came through this section, and there was one other section that I didn't like the outcomes as much, and then that was it. So knowing that this was of interest, knowing that compositionally it was really cool, knowing that it helped to tell the story of, you know, what we were doing and what we were up to on this particular trip, you know, it made sense to pull the camera out and try to make something happen, but to do it without interrupting the actual experience and taking people, the subjects of the imagery, out of their own experience was really important to me. So a little bit of anticipation and thoughtfulness, and you can still get your images. So that's one idea. Another idea here is, again, in terms of just adding vocabulary to your stories, and figuring out when is the best time to take a picture. So in this case, we got to camp fairly early. This is in the high Sierra of Yosemite National Park. We're way off trail, below a little mountaineering peak in this case. And we got in early. Like, we went swimming in that little lake that you see down there. We had made some dinner. And our camp, we had just these little kind of sedge grass nooks where we could set up one tent at a time, and everybody was spread around all over the place. And somebody was like, "Oh, this would be great to take a picture of this camp. It's so interesting, at dinner." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's not great light. We had weird harsh shadows. You couldn't really see people hidden around on the rocks." And I was like, "I'm not going to go take a picture of that." But then it got me thinking that, wow, this is really a beautiful scene. Like, what can we actually do? And so when dinner was over, I went and I set my tripod up and I composed what I thought was an interesting scene. And then I just left my camera there, turned off, and went back to camp. And a couple hours later, I returned to try to capture this. So this is now when everybody's going to bed. The moon is up high in the sky. I used a wide angle prime lens so I could get a nice starburst effect. And then I asked those guys that you see two headlamps that are in here. I asked them to use their headlamps and move around a little bit. And then we got this cool image, that we all sort of envisioned together, of this high camp at night and everybody getting ready to go to bed before their mountaineering ascent. Way more interesting and compelling, I believe, than just something, of maybe a couple of tents in a sunset with harsh shadows. There's a lot more happening here, and it helped to tell the story of what's going on. So not just taking pictures again, but anticipating when is going to be the best moment to take the picture and create the most compelling image. And here's another one. I couldn't resist another Africa picture because I'm excited about some of the images I was just able to capture. So here's another great one about sort of creating something out of nothing. So we were actually birding later in the evening, and we always have our eye open on the trees, on the acacia trees, in these river corridors for leopards, because that's where they hang out. And leopards don't always hang out in the same trees, so you don't know where to find them. They'll use any trees that are up there. And at about the same time, me and one of the other guys that were in the safari vehicle, we said, "There's a leopard in the tree." So everybody perked up and I'm like, "Okay, great." And so we repositioned the car. And this is in an area where off-trail driving is allowed, as long as you're not rolling over bushes and all that kind of stuff. You're doing it responsibly, but you can be on the grasses and go off-trail. And so that's what we did. And we came up close, and we got to the spot where I'm with a telephoto lens right now. I think I made this image at 400 millimeters, and we have a leopard up at the tree. And then but the funny thing was that as we came up, one of the other people that were in the vehicle said, "Oh, where's the leopard? Where do I look for the leopard?" And two of us at the same time, I said, "Oh, it's in the top left of the tree as you're looking at it now on this big branch." And the other guy said, "It's down the bottom near a big V, look off to the right." And we both looked at each other and then we realized there were two leopards up there. It was a cub, almost full-grown cub with the mother. And so then we're really excited, right? And so then, all right, well, what's going to happen? Well, the next thing that was going to happen is that the sun was going to drop lower. It's going to get below clouds that are in the sky. We're going to get some nice lighting. And right around sunset, right at sunset, is when leopards come out of the tree. And so we all made the decision, well, let's sit here for a little while. We're not far away from sunset, and we'll see if they come down while there's still some light. So then it's like, well, what are they going to do? Where are they going to come down? And where's the light going to be? And so we positioned ourselves to get this image. So again, situationally aware, we know the behavior of the animals. We know where the sun is. We're thinking about where the best angle is. We're anticipating the behavior of the animal, what's going to come next. And then we're putting ourselves in the position to anticipate that thing that's going to be a lot more interesting. And so that's what happened here. And we have this nice side lighting on the leopard as we came down. Now, what was extra special about this is that there were two leopards that were up there. So this was the cub that came down. The next thing that happened was nothing. the mother just sat there. And then we're like, well, shoot, was everybody happy with the cub? And we said, yeah, people were happy, we got this image. Well, let's move the vehicle because the mother's got to come down too. So then we set ourselves up in another position. And then I was able to get the mother coming down about 15 minutes later, because at that time of day, the cub was coming down for a reason. It was hungry and it wanted to go hunt. It wasn't going to go back at the tree. And so you knew that the mother was going to be motivated. It was only a matter of time until the young one makes the mother do what she might not want to do yet, right? And so here we are. So creating and anticipating moments based on your knowledge of what's happening around there can help you get more compelling imagery. Yeah. So that's that section. Gordon, how are we doing on questions?
That leopard photo of the cub is outstanding. That's the decisive moment. Well done. One person's asked about sunrises and sunsets and how to expose for bright, colorful sky and capture detail in the foreground, as well as without washing out the sky or blocking the foreground. Do you do that in post-production or any?
Yeah, I guess it depends a little bit. I would say that it's becoming easier now. The new cameras have such an incredible dynamic range that it's getting easier. And for those that have delved into Ansel Adams's work and know a little about the zone system, you can basically play that game with your histograms. And so the idea, histograms are a really powerful tool, and it's my guideline for situations where you have really bright and really dark lighting and you're trying to figure things out, right? And so without getting into a whole technical thing, if you can keep your histogram somewhere in the middle where you're not blowing out all your highlights and you're not blowing out all the shadows, then you can usually edit that image and adjust the highlights and the lowlights. When you look at that image in your viewfinder, it's probably going to look like crap. But in the histogram, you'll see that you've captured all that data and that you haven't blown out anything in the darks or the lights. And so you know that you can work with that. I'll also say this is that I tend to try to drag everything over to what would be the bright side of the histogram. So it's usually the right-hand side of the histogram, because when you do have to make adjustments, I find that it looks a lot more natural in post-process to darken things than it does to brighten things. When you're brightening things like foregrounds, it tends to wash out the color and you lose contrast. So then you need to immediately start making additional adjustments. And as we're all maybe aware, the more adjustments you have to make to your digital negatives, then the more fake it starts looking. So I always like to tease a little bit more toward the bright side because darkening means less editing. Does that help?
Thanks, Colby. Yeah, and looking at the playback on your LCD screen is not a good judge. It's so much better to check your histogram, especially when you're in difficult lighting situations. So that's a good recommendation. Yeah,
live and die by the histogram. If you're not familiar with how to use it, that's a essential tip. Any other questions for now, Gordon? Or
well, I'm afraid we're going to run out of time, so I want you to do your presentation. So we're going to keep going.
Yeah. Okay. We'll keep going then. So then storytelling and levels of intimacy. So I've talked a little bit about storytelling. Let's talk about levels of intimacy, and then we'll tie it all together. So what do I mean by that? We have a tendency, I think, just individually to create an image that we know works over and over again in different ways. And especially, again, when we're in new places and new environments and there's new action and things to process, it's really easy to default into the types of images and the compositions that we know are going to work really well with our equipment and for our own eye. The danger there then lies in creating a lot of images that are the same. And so if we want to think about storytelling, we want to think about different ways to tell the story about something. And one really useful tool is to just use different focal lengths. You're probably carrying multiple lenses, or you have a zoom lens. And so try taking images at different focal lengths. And so what do I mean by that? On the top left here, we have the bison. They're in Lamar Valley in Yellowstone. And it's a big wide angle scene setting shot. This is where they live. This is what they're doing. They're digging around in the snow. They're trying to find food. Then you get into a medium shot. Down in the bottom left, we see that the bison are there. They're feeding in herds. They're digging through the snow. They're covered in snow. There's a lot going on there. And then we go a little bit closer. Now we've used a telephoto lens. And in this case, also added a little bit of motion because this particular day it was snowing out. And now here we have a bison that's trudging through the snow. It's covered in snow. But you see its eye has a little catch light. There's a emotional connection to the animal at this point. But again, a lot of little details with the horn and the snow and the fur and all of this, right? So each one of these images tells something different about the bison and what the bison is doing here in the middle of winter. If this sounds familiar to you, it should be for a good reason. There's a certain gold bordered magazine that's famous for these kind of layouts, right? Where we're thinking about different levels of intimacy to help tell a story. And in this case, 3 images can really set off, in the case here, a bunch of fake text in Latin, just help tell the story of the bison and what's happening. A picture tells 1,000 words. So photojournalism, this is one of the essential sort of tenets of photojournalism, is these levels of intimacy. Yeah, so some other things that we can then think about in terms of storytelling. What story are you telling? These images you're looking at now are very, very similar. The only difference, aside from a few moments in time, is that there's a person on the right-hand side. If you look in the top right, you'll notice a woman that's wearing an orange jacket. And so, you know, think, oh, here we are, we're in this beautiful place. In this case, we're in Banff National Park up in Canada. And, you know, here's this beautiful place that we're visiting, and this big gorge and these turquoise waters that are, you know, result of glacial silt in there. You know, beautiful again. But if we're thinking about in terms of like, what was it like to be there? What was your adventure travel trip like? How does the human experience relate to this landscape? What was it like to be there? Well, now you put this person in there and you have an immediate sense of scale. You can feel like you're there. You're wondering, what is she doing perched way out there like that? It might make you think a little bit, oh, I hope she's safe. I hope she's okay. What's happening, right? So there's just by throwing that one person in there in a pretty colored jacket, you change the whole context of that picture and what's happening there, and the story there is to be told and what there is to learn from that image. And I'll use that to launch into, you know, sort of thinking about things in different ways. When we think of people images, and I'm not going to show you a lot of pictures of them because you've seen them before, but the Instagram-y kind of images, it's usually pictures of people that are up close and they're smiling, they might be hugging each other, right? But again, thinking of levels of intimacy, people pictures don't all have to be portraits. They can be pictures of people doing things in interesting places and in interesting ways. And so here we have 4 different pictures in 4 different environments of ways where we can have little people, but in big places to help show a sense of scale and what's happening in the bigger picture. So again, it's these scene setting shots that you can get that help establish where you are and what's happening in context of the rest of your images. And then if we look at that in a different way, usually we think of big establishment shots as the great landscape shots, right? And then we're going to start moving into people pictures, and you can throw that on its end as well, because you can take portraits of nature just like you would take portraits of people. So another way to find a sense of intimacy in your stories and in the places, and help convey what it was like to actually be there. Gordon, I'm just going to jump in since you pointed out we're going a little bit over thanks to my technical delay, and then maybe we'll just hit all the questions then after this. So just a few wrap-up thoughts, if that's good with you.
Yep, that's good.
So emotions, I mean, excellent photography, interesting photography. It's going to spark something inside you that is compelling. And so some ways that we can evoke emotions within our photography. Here's an example of something that really doesn't bring in a lot of emotion, right? We have what's a nice picture. You have an interesting animal. The penguins are nice and clean. There's some pretty color in the background. It follows the rule of thirds nicely, right? By, all marks, like this is a good picture, right? But it's not that compelling. It's not that interesting. I don't feel like I really want to ask a lot of questions about the penguin. It's, okay, that's cool. What's the next picture, right? So again, situational awareness, you start paying attention to what's going on, where are the interesting things, what's different. If you've seen that other penguin picture before, I bet you haven't seen this penguin picture, right? So now it's something that's new, it's interesting, that's exciting to people. We have a lot of questions being raised. What are these penguins doing? What is that one penguin doing? Why is it so dirty? Why is it excited? You feel a sense of excitement. You feel maybe even a sense of joy or humor. There's a lot more that's happening in this image. We have a nice framing, and it still follows the rule of thirds. So all the same compositional techniques still apply to this, but we have a lot more emotion that's involved. It goes well past just being a portrait of some penguins that you happened to encounter. We can think about that in terms of some of those intimacy settings that we had too, like some moodiness that go into things. Here we've used low contrast post-processing on a stormy day. And we can also think about, so that you have like loneliness and solitude, all of these other emotions that come out of that, right? But what we're starting to get into is this idea of universal concepts and incorporating universal concepts into your imagery. And so we have things like here, we have survival, we have life and death, the circle of life. You can think of love, you can think of joy. These are things that no matter who the person is that's looking at your image, they will understand these things and relate to things. They're universal. It doesn't matter their culture, what nation they come from, their race, their background, their educational background. All people feel these things, and that's what makes them universal. And so by incorporating these things that evoke some of the emotions, people will automatically become more interested, and that's what makes things more compelling. And then as they come to learn more about the story, then those things can even become more meaningful. And they can certainly become more meaningful for you if you can capture all of that emotion that you were feeling at the time that you took the image. If you really want to get fancy, you can start playing with camera tricks like slow motion blurs. Again, level of intimacy here. You makes me think of just sort of, it's slow, it's serene. Maybe it's retirement. Maybe it's at the end of a long day, right? There's just all these things that come out of an image like this that you can start naming, and different people, of course, will feel different things. So there's some fun things that you can do. This would be called painting with light, which is essentially just using a slow shutter speed and then painting the camera around a little bit. It's a pretty fun technique, but it's a great way to invoke emotion. And then anticipation is another really good one. Oftentimes, it's like a lot of people will be like, but what happened next? Did the bear hit the other bear? Like, did snow fly everywhere? Like, what happened? The fact that they're asking all of those questions makes this image more compelling than the one where the bear actually gets hit. And I can tell you that because I have tons of images that are about all of them, and these are the ones that people usually talk about. So the anticipation of something coming next, people feel that, like it builds up inside them. There's a tightness in their chest. They start asking questions about your work and what's going on, and it sparks a conversation. That's good art. And then if not anything else, your images can just bring you joy. Don't forget to take pictures of people that you're with. Find fun ways to showcase, how cold it was, for instance, by throwing soup up in the air and watching it, or this is just hot water up in the air and watching it freeze in the middle of Yellowstone in the winter. Just little things that help remind you how much fun it was to be on your holiday. It doesn't always have to be about what other people are experiencing from your images. So anyway, Gordon, that's what I have for everybody today. Do you want to hit up some more of the questions?
Yeah, this is fantastic, Colby. Thank you so much. We have a question that was submitted, but also in the feed. So this is from Kara Eckert, class of 20, and also Beth Kara kind of has a similar question. She said, I'm always trying to question if I should take pictures of people in other countries, especially when they are more developing countries and I'm a white, rich traveler. Even if they give permission, I still feel like I'm exoticizing them and making them part of the travel experience / wonder. Do you have any perspective on this?
Yeah, I do. This is something I encounter all the time in my work as a professional guide. I have two thoughts. One is any images that you do take. I think transparency is really nice when you're displaying those images, either on social media or whoever. Like literally writing in the story of who this person is and why it was interesting for you to take a picture, maybe something that you learned from them. We think about responsible visitation, and well, you should be thinking about responsible visitation, but representing yourself later. And when it comes to being a photographer is just as important to all of the things that you were doing there, because some people might see, oh, there's a picture of a person or a person maybe in cultural regalia, something like this. And like, oh, that's cool. I can just go and do that. But helping to tell that person's story shows that you respect that person and are responsible with your work and in that situation. So then flipping that around, then how do you come then to make that image in the first place? Something I actually wrote about in my book for guides to help their guests with. So again, we're trying to tell stories, and if you're choosing to take a picture of a person, it should be because you're choosing to tell their story, or have them help tell the story of the place that you're in. It doesn't usually work to just go over and ask that person, hey, is it okay if I take your picture? That's probably for most of us still going to feel uncomfortable, and there's not going to be much of a story there afterwards. For me, and what I encourage my guests to do is, if you see people, you encounter anybody during your trip that you think is interesting, they're people. Go talk to them, strike up a conversation. If you hit it off with that person and there's some energy between you, and you think that you do want to share their story, or they have something to contribute to the story you're trying to tell, then ask them if that's okay. And then it becomes really fun, right? Now you're just with a new acquaintance instead of somebody that you think just looks cool. That would be my advice.
Excellent. Thank you, Colby. We have a question from Rachel Word, who's an excellent portrait and wedding photographer. She was one of my students. She said, what is your go-to lens for adventure photography? If you could only bring one lens, what would you bring?
Oh, of course, she's going to limit me to one lens. I find that more than I think I want to, I shoot with my 100 to 400 4.5. It's really versatile. It's great for portraits. It's great for wildlife. And I feel like I don't have to be up in like people's faces all the time with that. I can work the periphery. I can do other things. With that said, I also have a 20mm prime. And I love that for adventure travel. And when I'm doing more active sports, like when I'm doing like climbing trips or mountaineering, when I'm working on the sailboat, I really like the 20mm because I don't always have room to maneuver, and I can easily get people or foreground things that are happening, but still show the background and add some context to what's happening. And then those beautiful starbursts, the prime lenses are great for that.
Excellent. Thank you. Julian Michaels, class of 21, where would you say the most underrated but wonderful place to travel is?
I mean, it depends on what you want to get out of it. I'm a big subscriber of just putting myself into situations where I feel like I don't really have the skill set to be there. Not in the sense of like improper risk management or anything like that, but places where I feel like daily life or the surrounding environment, natural environment, is just going to be so different to what I'm used to. I feel like that's most fun for me. It's really inspiring because everything is new and exciting. And I also find that I tend to learn more things the more I put myself into situations where it feels weird to me. I come to learn and understand new things in all these unexpected ways. So pick a place on the map that you don't know anything about. That's where I recommend.
All right. And then we had in the feed, somebody wanted to know about your post-production tools, what you do to, what you use.
Yeah, I'm definitely minimalist when it comes down to post-processing. I edit very similar to what you would do in the darkroom. That's how I was trained. I came up in the darkroom. And so I spend most of my time in Lightroom. I have a little workflow in Lightroom that I like. That's super simple. And then every once in a while, for whatever reason, and it usually has to do with printing something larger, then I might get into Adobe Photoshop and make additional tweaks for whatever reason there. Here and there, I've been asked, for some commercial projects here and there, which I don't do very much of, but to edit things in different ways. I personally, I'm not going to take somebody's head and put it on somebody else's head or put things there that don't belong, but I might get into like masking things out and that kind of stuff sometimes if it's going to be for a commercial project. But mostly, including all of these images that you've seen, it's just basic adjustments in Lightroom. And if you're paying attention to your histograms and, all of your settings when you're in the field, the first part of a good image, well, we won't get into that, but your negatives, your digital negatives are really important. So if you spend some time to get good digital negatives, you can minimize the work that you have to do in post-processing. And
Lightroom is the photographer's workplace. It's fantastic, and I bet you're loving the new masking tools.
Yeah, well, now it can figure out the subjects for me. I don't even have to.
And selecting the sky, that it works so well. I don't know how it would do here with the frozen soup, but I found it's incredible for landscape photography because those local adjustments are fantastic with the new masking tool.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so takeaways. Well, you want to go beyond the snapshot, right? Not be rapid fire. You talked about being present in the moment. That's really important, and enjoying your trip at the same time. Situational awareness, predicting and anticipating the outcome. Those are all important tools and you should try and tell stories and evoke emotions. So I think those are really good takeaways. You also talked about, using people for scale, and that gives a sense of the place, as well as looking past the subject, not just taking it from the signpost. Well, here's the sequoia trees, but looking and changing your point of view to get a perspective that's different and fresh. So I think if I speak for everyone, this was fantastic, and we really appreciate you spending the time and sharing your vision with us, Colby.
Yeah, well, thank you, Gordon. That was a nice summary, and yeah, it's great. It's great to be here again with y'all. I appreciate everybody joining today. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions today. I can see that on the Q&A, but I appreciate everybody's participation. And I'll say this, that like in our American vocabulary, we always say like, oh, I'm going to take pictures, I'm going to shoot pictures, but those are kind of negative terms, like we shoot people and we steal from people and, we take things. And I like to think as photography as an art. I like thinking about making images and being thoughtful about it, contributing something to society, telling a story. So I hope everybody will go out there and have wonderful adventures and make compelling images.
And I think that's the term Ansel Adams used, making images, not taking pictures.
Yeah.
So excellent. All right. Thanks, Colby. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. The next session in the Alumni Speaker Series is Creating Comic Books with Steve Urena, the class of 2011. That'll be on Tuesday, May 10th at 7 p.m. For more information about this and other events, you can go to www.sualum.com. And I hope everyone has a great night.